welcome to the Info Corridor. This is Hajra Haroon, and today I present to you the first ever episode of the Info Corridor Talk. To this platform, we aim to bring you a neutral and an unbiased analysis of the matters pertaining to climate change, security, strategy, and human rights. Today, we are going to talk about the rising extremism in India and its impact on the entire region. We are also going to talk about this recent ceasefire between India and Pakistan and its consequences which led to it, and also the underlying causes. So, joining us today is Mr. Jawad Falak. Mr. Jawad Falak is a research fellow at the Maritime Study Forum and has been affiliated with a number of research institutes such as ISRA, CSCR, and CPSD. He completed his MPhil from the National Defense University, where he also received a presidential award for his thesis on militant Hindutva. He writes and also appears on current affairs programs, mostly to talk on issues pertaining to India, Hindutva, and Islamophobia. Sir, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Ms. Hajar.
Sir, so I would like to begin with the question that what do you think would be the outcome of the current ceasefire between India and Pakistan?
Well, Ms. Hajar, if I may be frank, I do not believe that this ceasefire will go anywhere, as many are stating that there could be a major breakthrough due to this ceasefire. I do not believe so, because we have numerous examples in the past where such ceasefires or such breakthroughs have taken place. But unfortunately, history has shown us that such ceasefires are only used to reload, so we can start fighting all over again. Because the major issue that underlines the tension between Pakistan and India is the Kashmir issue. And there is no, let us say, concrete will, at least on the Indian side, for a lasting solution, which could be amicable to all sides. It merely wants to, let us say, have its cake and eat it, if I may be frank. And with this current Hindutva fascist government in power, we can only see that that they will only harden their attitude in Kashmir. They only accepted the ceasefire due to compulsion, such as a two-front war between India on one side and China and Pakistan on the other. While and they had numerous internal, let us say, pressure as well in the form of the farmers' government, economic downturn due to the COVID resurgence that is going on. So basically, I do not believe that the ceasefire will give a lasting solution to the current tensions.
Okay. Sir, and what do you think are the dynamics behind India's assent to the ceasefire?
Basically, we can say that there were external and internal compulsions. The external was first of all a more resurgent or a more assertive China, which was not only fighting India in Ladakh, but also inside Arunachal Pradesh. Then there was the fact that there was a more assertive Pakistan, whose diplomatic offensive had, let us say, shocked India in the beginning. The slogan that was raised by Prime Minister Imran Khan, that Modi is a fascist, is a Nazi, it gained much ground, to which the Indian side had no, let us say, rejoinder. Furthermore, its internal complication also, such as some of its fascist moves, led to international pressure, such as the downgrading in the freedom rankings by US and Swedish NGOs. And also, we can see that the internal compulsions, there was a series of mass protest movements taking place continuously inside India. We saw that in the Muslim anti-CAA protests, and now the much more larger and much more effective farmers movement, which has gained international support. And there were also the economic downturn, which was due to the mishandling of the COVID pandemic within India. We have seen that they have regressed minus 10% in the current year, which is quite a shock to their system. So they needed time to both handle these internal pressures. There were also external actors, which were compelled them. One is the change of guard in the US. Biden played his role, because you can see that it was basically the pressure from the Biden administration that caused them to end the 4G ban in IOJK. And there was also the behind-the-scene diplomacy from Gulf states, such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which limited but helped push India and Pakistan towards a ceasefire.
Sir, recently India has been ranked 111th out of 162 in the Freedom Index. So, considering that India is one of the largest democracies in the world, isn't it a downfall? Why do you think India is falling behind in the Freedom Index?
Quite frankly, I don't believe that India was a democracy as such. As the case of Kashmir shows that India was never a democracy. It was more of a controlled electorate.
Self-proclaimed democracy. Self-proclaimed democracy.
Yes, you can say that it was a self-proclaimed democracy, and this assertion was helped by the West also, who tended to woo India during the Cold War and after the Cold War because they saw them as a regional policeman. So, in order to make a narrative, they termed it as a what you can say as a democracy, which it was not. It is only a majoritarian system in which areas such as Kashmir are controlled through brute force and through fake engineered elections, while in other places there are there is not the liberal democracy but vote bank based democracy, which is termed limited democracy in most academic circles. What has happened that basically the narrative changed from the time of Nehru. Nehru gave a narrative of a secular India, which was democratic in its core. However, with the rise of Hindutva, we have seen that they have shifted from a secular to a Hindu first narrative. And this has not been welcomed by the, let us say, liberal Democrats present in the West, who tend to view the world in their own image. And they saw the rise of another strong man, such as Putin and Tayyip Erdogan or Duterte in Philippines, which is why they have now started using soft tactics in order to pressurize India. But they have not at the least used any hard tactics, such as we currently see being used against China in the context of Xinjiang.
Yes. Sir, what do you think could be the future of Hindutva?
I believe that Hindutva has become, well, it was already a part of the Indian socio-political environment, but it has increased so much so that it has become a danger to the very idea of India itself. Because when India gained independence, Kashmir was not only the part that did not wish to join it. The south of India had already formed a state known as Dravida Nadu, but it was on the basis of Nehru's assurance that it will be largely that India will largely be a decentralized structure in which every state or every ethnic group will be able to govern themselves while giving away some power in the form of foreign affairs and military to the center. However, Hindutva does not view decentralization as a boon, but it sees it as a danger. It believes in one religion, one constitution, and one country, as the same as we have seen in the Hindu kingdom before the rise of the Maoists in Nepal. So basically, what we have seen in Kashmir, in the revocation of Article 370, we have seen in the CAA enactment of CAA, and now this farmer protest, that the center is becoming more powerful. It is exerting its force on the states. In the farmers' protest, many states have complained to the center that they were overstepping their boundaries. So if this continues, we may not be seeing a much united India any longer. How long it takes is one cannot say, but if Hindutva continues to rise across India, we may see that a more disjointed, a more fractious rivalry among states happening.
Sir, and what do you think would be the future of India in the context of Quad and Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
Well, basically, as we have seen during the days of the Cold War, India has turned to play both sides. It was a founder of the non-aligned movement, but it also took arms and also colluded with both the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Its policy stems from its strategic culture, in which it sees itself as an eternal civilization. It already saw itself as a great player among nations as soon as it gained independence. So its presence in both the SCO and now the Quad, it basically a continuation of that policy, which can be saying like, to run with the hare and hunt with the hounds. So what I see is that it's due to this duplicitous nature, it will find itself being limited in the SCO, or what we can see in the SCO as well as the BRICS, the new superpower bloc that was touted. And also in the case of Quad, we can see it will become a victim to Quad's own limitations. For example, the Quad, every country in the Quad has its own concept of the Indo-Pacific. The United States, in terms of the United States, the Indo-Pacific starts from its western coast and ends on the maritime border between Pakistan and India. But for India, the Indo-Pacific starts from the African coast and ends around the middle of Indonesia. And that is the same with the other two countries, Japan and Australia. So these limitations will drive a wedge in the effectiveness of the organization. What India, I believe, will hope to gain from the Quad is enough conventional military as well as other military benefits such as intelligence sharing in order to stave off both China as well as Pakistan.
Mr. Jawad, thank you so much for your time. We are highly honored to have you with us. Thank you, sir.